glass, William. And welcome to you from me. Hope to get to meet you at supper if I haven't already. I remember one of the first times I ever got really confused about prayer. We were in the middle of a drought that spread about halfway across Queensland, and I was acutely aware that the farmers were really doing it tough and they needed rain. And I found myself in a group that was praying for a fine weekend for their trip away. And I remember thinking, well, how is this going to work? Because I'm pretty sure there are farmers out there praying for rain. So how is it possible for God to answer these two prayers at the same time? How is God going to make it rain and not make it rain at the same time? And then that led me to more questions. It seems like farmers need more rain. They need rain more than we need a fine weekend. So should we pray for rain for the farmers and not pray for a fine weekend for our group? And if it doesn't rain, does that mean that God prioritised our group's weekend away over the farmers? Over the farmers' livelihoods? What does that say about God's compassion for farmers? Shouldn't God prioritise? Does he prioritise like people's needs? Looking back on that experience, I realised that I was asking questions about how God runs the universe. When I survived cancer, lots of people attributed it to people praying for me. But my friend, who had cancer at the same time as me, she died. People were praying for her too. Does God give me a parking space outside the supermarket because I prayed for one, while a child on the other side of the world dies from preventable disease? Was nobody praying for that child? Well, we've been looking at the book of Job, the final book in our wisdom literature. And last week I suggested that the genre or the type of literature that best fits Job is not some sort of historical narrative, but more of a philosophical treatise or maybe a thought experiment about undeserved suffering and how God runs the universe. And you'll remember I put a triangle up with three statements that are embedded in the debate in the book of Job, and discovered that all three statements can't be true at the same time. Job's friends believed that God is just. That was at the top of the triangle. I meant to put it into my PowerPoint and I just forgot. So we've got God is just at the top of the triangle. We've got Job is innocent at one corner, and God runs the universe according to the just principles. He rewards the good and punishes the bad. So that's our triangle. Now, Job's friends believed the top one, that God is just, and therefore they also believed the bottom one, that God runs the universe according to just and fair principles. God rewards the good and punishes the bad. Because that seems like just and fair principles, doesn't it? Therefore, if those two statements are true, then Job must not be innocent because he is suffering, and that looks like punishment from God. But Job, he knows that he is innocent, that bottom corner is true, and he hasn't done anything to deserve God's punishment. He also believes the other bottom part of the triangle, that God rewards the good and punishes the bad. But since he's being punished, even though he's innocent, it must mean that God cannot be a just God. Well, that triangle, it looks like a very rational set of arguments, doesn't it? And it is. But you read Job and you realise he is not in a rational state of mind. He is on a roller coaster of emotion. And the genius of this book, this literary artistry, is that it manages to capture the anguish that people feel when they feel abandoned by God. In some cases, because of the conclusions that they've drawn about God because of their current circumstances. And maybe you felt that anguish. Job is in despair. We read last week, he wishes the day he was born would cease to exist. His world has gone dark. He can't see any light anywhere. And in the midst of all of this, Job is trying to understand, where is God? This God, he's always trusted this God, always served this God. He's always been loyal to this God. And now this God seems to have turned his back on Job. And Job clings almost defiantly to this little scrap of faith that he has left. He says, "Though God slay me, yet will I hope in him." That's at the start of the book, though. He starts to slide more and more into despair. At one point, he begs God for a quick death. Why? Because he can feel his faith starting to slip away, and he would rather die than give up on God. And when his pleas for a quick death go unanswered, he turns to wishing for a mediator who could step in and somehow resolve this misunderstanding, this terrible misunderstanding between him and God. Maybe a mediator could help sort this out. And he gives up on that. And in the end, Job would just be content if he just had one question answered. God, why? Just tell me why. Why have these terrible things happened to me? And Job becomes, as the book goes on, Job becomes more and more insistent that God must answer this question. And he refuses to back down. He demands an explanation from God. Well, finally, God steps in and gives an answer. You've heard a little bit of that tonight when William read. And when we as readers get to this point in the book of Job, we're just waiting with bated breath to see what the answer is. Why do the innocent sometimes get blinded by tragedy? Why do good people suffer? But as our eyes frantically scan the passages, flick the pages, looking for where the answer is, we realise we're going to be disappointed. Because God doesn't answer Job's question of why he is suffering. Instead, God gives Job this virtual tour of the universe. He starts with cosmology, moves to meteorology, ends up with zoology. He goes from the stars and the foundations of the earth to weather patterns and where the snow is kept in its storehouses, to intricate details of animals in the wild. And it is some of the most beautiful poetry that you have ever read. It's also some of the most sarcastic poetry that you've ever read. It's basically 4 chapters of God throwing shade. He says things like, "Well, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding, Job. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Hey, Job, can you give me directions to the home of light and the address of where darkness lives? Surely you know. You were born before then, right? The number of your days is so great. That is harsh. If I was convinced that this book was narrating the real scenario of a real person named Job who actually lost his family in tragic circumstances because God made a deal with the devil, I might just walk away now. If I thought that this beautiful, poetic sarcasm was God's actual response to a person crushed by unimaginable grief, I would be shaking my head in disgust. But if I take seriously the literary clues in the book, there once was a man named Job who lived in a land far, far away, then this response by God becomes almost comedic. In fact, it reminds me a lot of a scene in the Netflix series The Good Place. Who's seen that show? Yes, a few. The Good Place is about 4 humans who find themselves in the afterlife. I'd highly recommend it if you have Netflix. These 4 humans, they don't understand what's going on. They're told that they're in the good place, and yet bad things keep happening. And they begin to question the whole foundation of the point system that got them there. Do enough good things on earth and you'll get enough points to get into the good place when you die. But if you do bad things, you'll get negative points and you'll end up in the bad place. At one point, their whole eternal destiny hangs by a thread. They're facing an eternity of hideous punishment. But they managed to secure a hearing with the judge, the one who will decide on their case. When the judge shows up, she's portrayed as like a middle-aged Latino woman with attitude from maybe Brooklyn. Yes, she knows their eternal destiny sits in her hands, but she's also hungry and her burrito is going cold. Her attitude is that the 4 humans can't possibly know how difficult it is. She uses this kind of hand motions, how difficult it is to run the universe, and she's frankly a bit ticked off about them showing up on her lunch break and thinking that they know better. I watched that scene this week and I thought, that's a modern version of Job. Really, Job, you want to tell me how I should run the universe? You think it's easy, do you? Well, let's see you do it. Let's see you make it rain and not rain at the same time. You think the universe is simple and straightforward, do you? And it revolves around you and your problems. Well, let's just take a quick tour through the universe, shall we? And so this tour shows Job the unimaginable complexity of the universe. The universe is so beautiful, isn't it? It takes your breath away. And God knows every corner of it. That is very clear in this poetry, right down to how many months it takes for a wild deer to gestate and give birth, and how ravens feed their young. But this universe, it's also a place of paradoxes. It's full of paradoxes, and sometimes they're shocking paradoxes. So the eagle has this wonderful nurturing instinct, and it goes to great lengths to find food for its babies. It sits high on a rocky crag, searching for prey. With its amazing eyesight, it can see so far away, and it sits there and waits because its babies are hungry. But the nurture of its babies means violence and bloodshed for another living creature. And there's this grotesque image in Job of this baby eagle sucking up the blood from the scraps of flesh that the eagle has brought it. God also points out to Job that the universe doesn't revolve around humans. And this point is actually quite unique to Job. It's a far cry from what we read in Genesis 1, isn't it? Where humans are the ultimate in the creation. So Job is quite unique in that perspective, and it's another example of how sometimes there are different perspectives in the same Bible. In Job, God points out that there are parts of the earth where no humans live, and yet God sends rain there to water the earth. Remember Genesis 1? Humans are supposed to subdue the earth. Well, in Job, God seems to delight in particularly the wild donkey for some reason and the wild ox that refuse to be tamed by humans. Listen to these verses. Is the wild ox willing to serve you? He's still throwing shade here. You can see this sarcasm. Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will it spend the night beside you? Will it till your fields just following after you? Can you rely on it to just bring the grain to your threshing floor? God is saying, you can't make wild animals do what you want. You can't bend the universe to your will. The universe that you live in is wild and mysterious, and you can only tame small bits of it. And God seems to think it's hilarious when humans think otherwise. The final part of God's speech to Job is a detailed description of two animals, the behemoth and the leviathan. Now, when you read the description, they really sound kind of like mythical creatures. And we don't really know what these creatures are. Maybe a hippopotamus and a crocodile, but some things don't quite line up, so we're not really sure. But whatever they are, they're huge and they're fierce. And again, God mocks the notion that humans could tame them. Listen to the dripping sarcasm in these verses describing the Leviathan. Can you pull Leviathan in with a fishhook? Can you put a rope in its nose? Or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it make many supplications to you? Will it speak soft words to you? Will it make a covenant with you to be taken as your servant forever? Will you play with it as you do a bird? And my favourite, or will you put it on a leash for your little girls? God points out that God made the behemoth and the Leviathan just like he made Job. And God takes great pride in these huge and fierce creatures, but if you come across one, it will kill you. It will kill you without a second thought, and not because it's evil, but because it's wild and it's dangerous. The universe that we live in is beautiful and it's majestic. And the universe we live in is wild and it's dangerous. It's untamable. It's unpredictable. And humans should not be so arrogant as to think we could just put it on a leash and make it do what we want. We can only stand in awe of the one who created such a majestic and untamable universe. And likewise, if we think that we are so clever as to tell God how to run the universe, we are sadly mistaken, because the universe does not run on a simple equation that can be worked out by humans. That bottom corner, good things equals reward from God, bad things equals punishment from God. It's a whole lot more complex than that. We cannot hope to understand why bad things happen to good people. It's way above our pay grade. when I get to the end of the book of Job, I realise it's a slapdown to anyone who ever thought that they could figure God out. To anyone who has ever felt sure that they know how God works. To anyone who has ever felt that they can confidently explain the reason for their friend's suffering or for their own. But the book isn't written to help Job. The book is written to help you. It's written to help you walk with Job as he struggles with what's happening in his life. Because maybe you're struggling with some things happening in your life. It's written to help you walk with Job as he's left just bewildered by this tragedy that's overcome him, as he struggles with the misunderstanding of his friends, with the accusation that there must be sin in your life to be the recipient of such suffering. And as Job finally lashes out at God with anger, but then as God takes him by the hand and shows him that life is much more complex than he could ever imagine. I think Job is written to challenge our simplistic and misguided views of how God should run the world, and to show us that the only good way forward for us is to trust God. That's the only avenue available for us. And in trusting God, to find peace, to carry us through that roller coaster of life. I want us to just spend a few quiet moments reflecting on that before we move on to prayers of the people. So if you want to sit with your eyes closed for a few moments, you feel free.